From one of Australia's former leading homicide detectives, this is I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin.
Serial killings, that's why I think we don't hear about them. I don't think they're being done as much, that more people are moving into mass shootings, especially shootings, which makes everybody at risk. You know, you can be out at the grocery store, you could be in a mall, and you got a mass shooting, and everybody gets hit.
I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin.
Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with Dr Ann Burgess, who is a legend amongst law enforcement agencies across the globe, particularly with those detectives responsible for investigating murders and serial offenders. If you missed part 1, we were talking about how Dr Burgess' skills developed as a psychiatric nurse and evolved into her working with the FBI, developing a process of understanding the mind of serial killers and profiling criminals in order to understand and, most importantly, catch killers. Dr Ann Burgess, welcome back.
Welcome. Glad to be back.
Okay, at the risk of embarrassing myself, I'm going to let you into a little secret here. Early in my career as a homicide detective, I'd read John Douglas's book, Mindhunter. And quite often, myself and my partner at the time, Paul Jacob, we'd be standing at murder scenes going, what would John Douglas do in this situation? In that, what I liked about it, and bearing in mind we're talking 30 years ago, I read the book, but what I took away from it was you've got to be proactive in the way that you approach an investigation. And I see failings of homicide investigations, I see where people sort of stand back, they gather the evidence, everyone's trying to solve the murder, but they're not proactive in their thinking and the way of initiating things happening in a crime scene. And I remember, like John Douglas, a way that, or the things that I picked up from that book and other literature that I'd read at the time, was about the strategy that's required when dealing with the media. Because most killers, and this is in my experience, do listen to the media, and when they've committed a crime, they're fascinated. And in back in the day, it was the front page paper or the evening news when stories were broken. They'd be fascinated by what the detectives were saying. And my biggest criticism of police and the use of media is where I see someone standing there, a police officer, usually a senior police officer, standing there going, we've got no idea what's happened. There's no witnesses, there's no forensic evidence and whatever. And I'm thinking, if I was the crook, if I was a suspect, I'd be sitting there going, yes, great. If I keep my mouth shut, I get away with it. What's your thoughts on strategies and the use of the media when you're investigating crimes?
Well, we looked into this, and interestingly enough, when you go way back to J. Edgar Hoover, who was one of the first directors of the FBI, one of the things he felt very strongly that he wanted to he wanted to influence the media. He had several of his agents assigned to that task. And what they would do is to play to the media. They would send, if they knew a birthday or an anniversary, they'd send cards. They always would say things. So they really use the media in a very positive way. And he knew that the way that the media portrayed them had a lot to do with their public, approval.
Yeah.
So that was very useful. That's where I would say that John Douglas really and Bob Ressler knew how to play the media and felt that that was very important in any kind of an investigation they were doing. That was one, I would say, and John was very good at being able to engage the media and to get the information out. So the media felt a part of it. It was really having them work with them. They realized they couldn't catch suspects all by themselves sometimes. So that they had to, and the John Jobert case was an excellent example of that, where they made it very clear that the community had to all be on board to catch this person. So that's one of their I think that's one of their strongest points that the two agents had, and they taught that to their the junior ones coming along.
Yeah, well, I use it. I'm just trying to think of examples that use the media. And a high-profile case I was investigating that's still unsolved, and it basically cost me my career, was the abduction of 3-year-old William Tyrrell, a young boy dressed in a Spider-Man suit, from his grandparents' house on a small rural town, Dead End Street. It's 10 years ago. This crime occurred. When I took over the investigation, this was sort of 5 months after his disappearance, a couple of things that I did. I made a call that when I took it over, I said it's a homicide-led investigation because there was speculation it was misadventure. I wanted to put pressure on the perpetrator by, it's homicide looking at it now. We're not going to forget about this. And there weren't that many places in there, so I said anyone that was in a square kilometre and had a map of the area from where William disappeared that now hasn't come forward, I'd be wondering why you haven't come forward, and it makes me very suspicious why you haven't come forward, because we did canvasses, door knocks and public appeals and all that. The other strategy in that particular investigation, this was in consultation with Dr Sarah Yule as well, we got $1 million reward for anyone that had information. It was the first time $1 million reward had been announced. Would you agree with that type of approach, or do you see there's benefits in that type of approach?
I would agree with that. The other, when you have a child, it reminds me of a case in which what Ressler did is he said, we need to talk with the mother because he felt the suspect was going to get in touch with her, and he did.
Yep.
And he tried to say she's alive and I've taken her here, there, and all that. And so the mother was able to, on the anniversary, this is a case that really dragged out. Actually, they thought that they knew who it was. And she says, I've been waiting for you to call. And took him by such surprise, in other words, used a technique that she didn't know necessarily if it was, but just saying, I'm waiting for you to call, with a great statement to be able to say. And that's
I can imagine that subtleness of it, but very powerful powerful way of encouraging. Yeah.
So that's another way that you can use media. You can find out, especially when you have a child, that you've got access to parents who are frantic and trying to. And if you engage them and say, "This is a way that you can help us." In other words, you can, and that empowers them to be able to want to work with you rather than fight you, or how sometimes people get annoyed with the media and so forth. You don't want to do that. So and they played it along, and it got so that he actually broke down. Well, this was the I think this was the Meyerhoff case, one of the early cases that Bob worked on.
Yeah.
And that worked. And another one, they couldn't figure out where the suspect would know about it was a missing teenager, I think. And it turned out that it was the man that was babysitting the house or watching the house. And he had written down a note. They looked at the paper and realized there was an indentation on it, and were able to get the phone number. And that's how they tracked him down. So that was another contact. So there are all these little techniques that media is if you don't have any other suspects, media, you've got to try media or try, some of these other strategies.
It's funny because I bought into that, and I can attribute it back to reading John Douglas's book about the use of the media. And there's other police that know we're not going to use the media, and I just see it as a tool. There was another interesting case. I wasn't involved in it, but friends of mine were involved in it. It was a rape in a very violent rape in a small country town, and we're talking a couple of hundred people. They put a questionnaire out in the town, and on what do you think should happen to the person if we catch this person? There was 299 responses going, he should be doing time, blah, blah, blah. And there was one response, well, everyone makes mistakes, and
there you go.
And guess who the person was? Look, something's standing out there.
Great, absolutely. Well, we're using social media now.
Have to buy into that, yes. Yep.
Yeah, that's really important. And so I have my undergraduate students watching the social media, and especially if they get a suspect, that we try to right away get the information and run it through AI to see if we can learn something, because it's pretty clear that they have to tell someone and they can brag about it. There is that need to not keep it so secret.
Yeah.
And so they can do social media. That's a new technique, I think, that's very, very useful.
Well, it's something that we've got to adopt now, because the power of the media is shifting to that social media side, isn't it? To get that
It
message
is.
out. It's definitely something that we've got to embrace. And I want to talk about AI, but a little bit later, if we could.
Sure.
On the crime scenes, what do crime scenes tell you? Because I find that another fascinating part of being a detective, interpreting the crime scene, taking your time to really take in what you're seeing and get a sense of what we're dealing with here.
Right. Well, the crime scene, of course, is I think is absolutely critical. So you can certainly get evidence. Douglas was very good at just going to a crime scene and getting a feel, as he would say, about what happened. And he would say you have to walk in the shoes of the killer to really understand it. And I think that's true, because you get so familiar with cases. And so just looking at it, that's where they will take time just to try to think of where was he, where was the victim, because you do have a victim. That's why the
Yeah.
victimology is so critical. And what position is she in? What might she be saying? Did she struggle? Was there, how was she located? How was she targeted? Where did they encounter each other? Just a lot of questions. So get in the mind of the investigator how this happened and why it happened. Why was she targeted?
Mm.
Why did she become a victim?
Yeah.
And I think that's a 180-degree turn from the way it used to be, where, oh, she shouldn't have been there. She shouldn't have been out walking. What did she think was going to, the blaming of the
Yeah.
victim,
Yeah.
which is where, unfortunately, a lot of it started. You got to go back to say, where was he? Or where was the killer? What
Yeah.
was he doing? Kind of
And
thing.
on that, blaming the victim, and I'm sure, again, probably the work that you did changed that thinking too. That I think society has moved on, and we understand better, not just law enforcement, but the comments. Well, she shouldn't have been out late at night, and the impact that has on victims, making them feel like they're to blame for the crime. And you would have seen
Right.
it as I saw it, dealing with victims where, no matter the circumstances, it always crosses their mind that they're at fault, or even the families of murdered victims are blaming themselves. I should have done something. And
Yep.
I'm always at pains to explain, no, you're the victim here. You're not the offender. Don't lay the blame there. So linking crimes. So,
Okay.
and we talked in part one a little bit about that and experiences I've had. Over here in New South Wales, the courts, we've got tendency and coincidence evidence. So if there's a serial rapist, we're looking at tendency and coincidence evidence. If a certain type of crime, the mannerisms in which that crime has been committed, and then put that person before court, instead of charging the person with perhaps five offences, we might put 10 offences on him because the other
Right.
crimes are so strikingly similar. Can you talk us your understanding and your knowledge of what you look for when you're trying to determine if crimes are linked?
Well, the linking of crimes was something that I remember Roy Hazelwood spent a lot of time on looking. He had to have a case where there were at least 10 crimes, and he would look at the first, the middle, and the last crime and see what were the common themes there. And that's what a lot of his research was, because he was interested in sometimes it changed. As I said before, the MO changed, the method of operation changed, but not necessarily the signature.
Yeah.
So the linkage part, classic is age. Is there a certain age? Is a certain gender? Is it a child? Is it an adolescent? Because that will give you some idea of what age you're looking for. Also, race is important, because
Mm.
more likely than not, it's going to be same race. It doesn't have to be, but if you want just more than 50%, it's going to be that. So that can give you the age of the person you're looking for, the gender, the race. Then you would look, if you're at the crime scene, then you're going to be able to look and see what was the weapon.
Yeah.
weapon, but weapon, they can use multiple weapons. So weapon isn't always a good indicator, but it will tell you if it was hands, blunt force trauma, or whether it was a gun or a knife. Certain cultural groups tend to, use, we always go back to the Mad Bomber.
Yeah.
I don't know that case, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Familiar
that
with it.
profiled that it would, because he would be Middle Eastern, because they tended to use bombs.
Yeah.
And this was Mad Bomber, obviously he was
Yeah.
using in New York
Cool.
City bombing. So sometimes there he would even be able to be that precise. And then the personality features is a clean crime scene to
Yeah.
pick up things, take it away, that kind of thing.
I would look at the crime scenes, including where the body, because sometimes the body's not where the actual murder has occurred, but whether a weapon was introduced. If it was brought there, well, there's some planning that's gone into it. The way the body's disposed of, quite often it doesn't necessarily have to be a serial killing, but I can see where there's a panic in the way that the body's been disposed of. So the crime, that's telling me that the crime, it wasn't planned, it escalated. So you're looking for something that triggered that, and the way that the body has been disposed of, because quite often that's the unraveling of the offender, because they leave a trail, like tracking an elephant through the snow. What do you look at in terms of the way the body's disposed of and the injuries to the body? So digging deep into that, what type of thing are you looking at there?
Well, I think that any bruising that you see, it's going to be anger. I mean, I would, something has triggered, either it's somebody else and he's using this as what we call a displacement. He's
Yeah.
angry at his wife, and so he takes it out on this other person. Elderly victims are often being a substitute for somebody that they knew in their childhood. That's an unusual, although there's a lot of crime against the elderly, physical. I think the other important factor is that you mentioned is whether the body was moved.
Yep.
How long did they spend with the body? That's important. That's going to give you a lot of the fantasy, and that you can pretty much figure out what is going on in the mind if you think it's a fantasy. Usually it is. In a sexual homicide, he's acting out something he's thought over and over. So that's important. What else? Let's see, whether is it posed? Is the body posed?
Yeah.
The other thing is it just discarded? Is it just dumped, is a word that they say, just, by the side of the road? In other words, just discarded, so that no emotional attachment of any kind is there. Or is that just showing what he thinks of that type of person? I'm just going to give you an example that I thought in determining the size of the offender, if he's big, tall, whatever. Then on the Jobert case, the first boy was just left right kind of off the road. The second body was found inside the forest and woods. And what was important there is there were two set of footprints going in, only one coming back. So
Okay.
what that said, is that he was not able to carry the victim in. So he marched him in, did what he did to him, and then came out.
I like that. Again, good detective work. Yeah. It seems simple, but these are the little things that can be missed. And I think I spent some time in the early hours of a morning with someone trying to show me where he disposed of a body 10 years before. And we pulled up there. It's dark. It was in a national park, and he walked in a certain distance, and he walked hundreds of meters, or 150 meters, which is a long way to carry a body. He was genuinely, I believe, trying to tell us where he disposed of the body in a shallow grave. We had no success. We searched the area that he indicated, and then we tried something. We put him in the actual car that he was driving at the time. We managed to get access to that at the time he was disposing of the body, and we put a mannequin that the rescue squad used, 80 kilos. It's the weight of a body, a limp body. Put it in the boot of the car, drove down to the location, and then said to him, "Look, we've got something in the boot. You show us where you think you took this body in the dark, in the bush." and how difficult it was, and that made him sort of rethink about the distance in which he carried it. And it was, in fact, not 100 metres in from the road; it was only about 25 metres in from the road. So, yeah,
Ah,
just
very good. Yeah.
different ways. I look at homicide, and I said, and I use the terminology that smoking gun gets used, or I say tracking an elephant through the snow. Some homicides are very simple to solve. The more difficult ones, I look at opportunity, capability, and motive. They're three factors that I fit in. Where you might have literally hundreds of persons of interest, and I look at opportunity. I can tick that off pretty easy. If the person's in prison, they haven't committed that crime.
Right.
Capability, looking at, is this person physically capable of committing the crime, or does this person have access to the type of weapons? So that's sort of a little bit more subjective. But motive is the one that is always, I think motive points you in the direction when you're looking for a suspect. What's your
Yes.
thoughts on motive? Because if one person understands motive, it would be you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's crucial.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to prove it in court, but
Yes.
they always want you to, right?
Yeah. Oh,
I
they
mean,
do. They
don't
want
want
it.
you to go into
They want the fact
They
sheet
don't
in
want-
the narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't want you going to court and say, I don't have any idea why he did this. I mean, that's the last thing that you want
Yeah.
to say. So you want to have some idea, or at least have some what we call hypotheses that are going to be plausible that a jury will understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of times they may say this is just a horrible murder, because maybe there's been dismemberment. Although dismemberment can sometimes be because they can't carry the body, they can't get it to another place, and that's so it's more of a practical motive, if you will, of why that happened, rather than any deep-seated psychological rationale. Because I did a case like that where he had really cut the body up, and he just left it all because he couldn't tried putting them in bags, and I mean it was, so I always remember that, to say don't go beyond any unreasonable explanation, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important as a motive, is that we have four categories of motive. Is this the first one is criminal enterprise. Is this something that, like a hit or an insurance killing or something? That's going to be more gun, weapon kind of thing. Or is it, the biggest category is more the personal cause? In other words, this is personal to the person. There are about 14 categories there,
Yeah.
of whether it's revenge or whether it's um, not sexual. Sexual is a whole separate unit. And then the fourth is group cause. But the personal cause, as I said, we have about 12 or 14 categories that to the person, and I think they make sense. It could be domestic, it could be a variety of others, but that's why we do the studies we're doing. We're doing one now on indigenous murdered and missing men, and comparing them to a group we've done on women. Why did they do this in their culture? So I do think that that's something that's really important to do to get at motive.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and the understanding that you give, and people quite often, they want it all tied up in a bow. This is what's happened, and this is the motive. And again, I learnt a lot from dealings with Sarah Jubelin, that, and even reference the William Tyrrell case, that she said the person that's committed this crime mightn't even know why they've committed this crime. So it's really hard to nail down the motive on a crime like that. A 3-year-old child. The public want it all to be a pedophile, a scary person. That seems to be the what the public perceive if a 3-year-old child's disappeared. But Sarah was always at pains to point out to me when we're working the case that the person responsible for the case mightn't even know why the crime he or she committed the crime. Yeah.
Yeah. That was in Mindhunter. That was one of the cases that they did on Monty Rissell. They said, we're here to study men and why they do what they do. And he says, well, I hope you can tell me why I did what I did.
Yeah. I
Very honest, absolutely.
right, you sit down in an interview room and you're interviewing someone and they've got all the detail and why did you do it? I'm not really sure. It's yeah,
No,
fascinating
absolutely.
world.
Yeah.
Serial killing and mass killings. I'm thinking here, and I haven't got the facts and figures in front of me, but mass killings seem to be more prominent than serial killing in
Yes,
current times.
right.
Do you is that something that you a trend that you've seen, or is it similar to what you've got in United States?
Yes, that's what I said. You're right. That the serial killings, that's why I think we don't hear about them. I don't think they're being done as much, that more people are moving into mass shootings, especially shootings, which
Right.
makes everybody at risk. You can be out at the grocery store, you could be in a mall,
Mm,
and you got a mass shooting and everybody gets hit.
yeah.
So I think it's a very much more fearful for the average person than a serial. Most people think, well, I don't think I'm going to encounter any serial killer because they usually try to get some kind of conversation going, in some kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Whereas the mass shooting doesn't, it's all very impersonal.
And what in the work that you can do, like I know over here for that type of the lone wolf situation, ideology, where there's ideology cross into action. What type of views do you have on prevention of that type of crime, mass
Well, right
killing?
now you're venturing into an area we're looking at, and that's a school shooter. We're having a
Okay,
terrible
yeah,
problem with school shooter, and so we almost think that's a separate. We're looking at a whole data set to see if we can justify that it's separate from, say, a white supremacist or an
yeah.
extremist or an incel, that there's something unique there. So we've got about 30 cases we're going to look at and run through AI to see if we can come up with something, because I think you're onto something and we're onto it too.
Yeah, that would be interesting if there's you see a pattern emerging, and you look back when the crime's been committed, and you look back and you think red flag, red flag, red flag. But to stop that happening, we've got to identify the seriousness of the offence. I think Laura Richards made the point with stalking. If someone's been in a relationship and is being stalked by a person that they've been in an intimate relationship with, and that person then makes a threat to kill that person, there's a 50-50 chance that'll be carried out. So we look
Yes.
at so we've got to understand, and this is something that's been a bane of my existence during my police career. I always thought stalking was a really dangerous crime that we didn't jump on with the full weight of the law that needed or given the importance, because I think it tells me something about the mindset of a person that's prepared to stalk
Yes.
another person.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. And I'm doing a case right now of quadruple killing. It's horrible. And it was so clear it was sexual jealousy
Yeah,
that we're not sure was even possible, that she there, we haven't had any confirmation, and we won't, because of course she was murdered. But this whole matter, when you look at a pattern, that's a common pattern in these domestic killings,
yeah.
that it's paranoia, suspicious that the partner is having some kind of affair with somebody else. So that is really, I would agree that it's very, and it's hard to stop. You can't stop it.
Mm,
The only way you stop it is you can't in any way encourage it, and you have to almost disappear. In that particular case, he had done that to an earlier partner, and she, for 2 years, went underground. She gave her information out, didn't let anybody know where she was. That's what it took for her. And then, of course, he then gets into this other relationship and he ends up killing her and
uh,
killing anybody that was guarding her.
yeah.
That was, she had a protective order out. I mean, she did everything that she possibly could.
Yeah, I look. We've had a spate of domestic related murders, and quite often it's that jilted lover or jilted partner, and
Yes.
it ends up
Yes.
in someone being killed. We've had a real spate of them at the moment in this country. But I think we've got to start. We've brought in new legislation, coercive control, which I think is a step in the right direction, and that's because police hands were tied in that you'd turn up to a domestic situation. Well, there hasn't been a physical assault. What can we charge this person with? now coercive control, because again, indicators that lead up to the eventual act, which tends to be a very violent crime.
Sure, sure. Well, the other thing, just to go back to that case that I'm working on
Yeah.
now, is she was so scared she wanted to carry a little knife to protect herself, and because she was on probation for another matter, they said, no, you can't have it. She might have been able to have protected herself when he comes in, because he changes weapons. He changes
Yeah.
from gun to knife. So the use of a knife is so much more personal.
Yeah.
And you might have been able to pull that and have saved herself. So it's awful.
Another question
Yes.
I want to ask you that I get asked a lot, and I think you've got a lot more understanding of it than myself. Nature or nurture? Like, people often raise that with me as a homicide detective. Do you think it was the environment, or do you think they were born that way? What's your take on nature or nurture?
I don't think that it's genetic.
Yep.
I don't think that there's any genetic link, but they've grown up in an atmosphere. If they've grown up in an atmosphere where there is role modeling, if you will,
Yeah.
that can be very dangerous, and that they can learn. It's
Yep.
what we kind of call trauma learning. If they've been abused, say, a father can be very aggressive and very physically damaging to his son, and especially if he's targeted as the favored child, not favored necessarily positively, that I think environment is very, very important. As to the nature part, I think not so much, but yeah, I've never seen any studies that have confirmed it. Would be very hard to do that. So I'm much more that the environment,
Environment.
and especially the people that they are around, yeah, and that they themselves have been traumatized in some way that has stuck with them. Don't forget, we use the theory that it's a fantasy that gets nurtured and kind of acted out,
Yeah.
and it's got to come from somewhere, and that it could come from something that happened to them, and that's a way that they're expressing it.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of James Fallon, a neuroscientist that did PET scans of people that were considered psychopaths, including some
Right.
serial killers. He made the observation, he did PET scans on the brains and the frontal
Okay.
cortex or whatever, and clearly I'm not
Sure.
a brain expert, but said there was a pattern that he would see in people that have been identified as psychopaths. And he needed something to cross-reference the study, so he got
Okay.
a PET scan done of his own brain and other people he knew. He had the same predisposition of some of the psychopaths whose brains the PET scan was done on.
Oh dear.
But he came to the conclusion, I found this interesting, he came to the conclusion that his environment that he grew up in those nurturing years, from birth to the age of 3, those crucial years, was in a loving, caring environment. And then he's looking at
Right.
these other ones that have acted out as a psychopath, as you would think, and turned into notorious killers, have grown up in that traumatic environment when there wasn't love, there wasn't nurturing, and all that. And sort of his take on it was almost like a combination, and it seemed to make sense what he was saying there. And it ties into what you're saying
Yeah.
about the environment having a part in it.
Right. Right. I just think it's critical. And the trauma piece is critical too. But I think that if he's got some good research, you can't ignore it.
Yeah, well,
That's really good. That's an addition to the fee.
yeah. Well, it was
So,
interesting. And you've mentioned AI a lot, and I'd like to think I embrace technology. I'm coming along to that thinking. I've recently started to delve into AI in a lot of stuff that I'm doing, and I keep reflecting back. And I've been out of the police for 4 or so years, and I'm reflecting back how handy that would be. You've
sure,
referenced it a
absolutely.
lot. Can you just talk to us about how you're using AI and what you're seeing in
Sure.
contemporary law enforcement, how they're using AI these days?
Well, we're using it, what's called machine learning, because it is a machine, computer is a
Yep.
machine. And we're looking at what we call topic modeling, that when you put in the data, you're going to get patterns that come out. Now we've talked
Mm.
about a lot of patterns, but this does it like in 5 minutes, where we might have taken 5 years. We did a comparison with a group out in Kansas, and we said, you send us, we do this for threat assessment.
Yep.
Police will get in. Somebody saying, I'm going to blow up a building or I'm going to kill somebody, and that's really scary, and they have to decide. So I said, send us a case, as much data as you can, and
Mm.
we'll run it through our algorithm. And they did, and it took 15 minutes. We sent back what we found as terms of it was a serious case where they weren't sure if this guy was crazy, quote, quote, or whether he was really going to kill somebody. And they had decided that it was not a threat. So we ran it, took 15 minutes. They had taken almost 15 months
Yeah.
to look at it. The poor woman that collapsed, she was, I can't believe you did it in 15 minutes, but came up with many of the, I felt badly for her, but
Yeah.
it came with the other kinds of things that they hadn't thought of. So we sent it back to them and said, maybe you better keep this. And if he gives you another threat, because he had given them
Yeah.
multiple threats, this wasn't just an isolated one, that maybe you should take it seriously, and let us know if there's anything. So that was just an example of how
Yeah.
fast we were able to run material that they had taken so long. So it's wonderful if you've got a large amount of data that you want
Yeah.
to look at very quickly. And if you get the right algorithm, I mean, that's your key. You've got to have that. And then it just whips through the data. So we've looked at 23 murderers' manifestos.
Yep.
Some of them, Kaczynski,
Yeah.
Rogers, any of them, they're on the list. And now when we get a case, we can run the single case as comparison to the 23 that we have. And that will tell us what we're looking for. The whole thing is, are they telling the truth? That's our next step, is when we get data or they do an interview, are they
Yeah.
telling us the truth? They're telling the person the truth. That's our next step. We have to come up with the algorithm there. We're going to take some court testimony that
Yeah.
was done under oath. I think we'll start with the Menendez
Yeah.
case and see whether they were telling the truth, kind of thing.
It's something that we have to embrace, isn't it? I started in homicide, and it was cards. That was, there was cards that we alphabetically for suspects, information, and all that,
Sure, sure.
and where we've got to now.
Yeah, yeah, we have to go with it. I don't think we can ignore it. I mean, everybody is into it. So, and it should be not fun, but it should be looked at as just another tool, another
Yeah.
technique. And we
Well,
shouldn't say we're not going to do it.
yeah. No, it makes sense. Reflecting on your career, some of the people that you've come into contact with, and I had a quote, and I'm losing my paperwork here, but I had a quote from when you first started hearing the interviews that John Douglas and the team were doing with some of the notorious serial killers, like eavesdropping on the rawest fringes of humanity.
Yeah.
What
And
can you? I would imagine it would have been fascinating. What are some of the people that, or some of the cases you've looked at that you think are memorable, not for any particular reason, but just things that have stood out to you in the time that you've been working in the field that you have?
well, it's one of the things I always wondered about, but maybe I shouldn't, is, and again, I go back to Joe Bear. He was classic for that. He was one of our first, is they would do this horrendous killing.
Yep.
And then they might go and have dinner or have breakfast or go to sleep. It was like, oh, nothing, it didn't seem to impact on them. And I
Yeah.
remember Joe Bear saying in the interview we did with him, he said, that's what the prosecutor said, is how callous could it be? And he said it was. So they
Yeah.
admitted, I think that gets to your point about the psychopathic quality, that they don't have any empathy. They're unable.
Yeah.
So is that something that is genetic, nature, versus do they just learn it, or do they so in cold to it? But that's what Kemper would say.
Yeah.
Um, that they would go home and sleep. I remember, or they would talk about how hard it was to kill someone, that it took a lot of energy.
Oh, poor
You
guy.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know. I mean, we have a horrible case here up in Idaho University where this one person killed four young women, three women and a man.
Mm.
He did it all within a very short time. I mean, that took a
Yeah.
lot of, they haven't had the trial yet. They have a
Yeah.
suspect, but that takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. And I don't think we think in those terms, that we should be
Yep.
more just very, very logical about it. And how can they do that? You
Mm.
know, that's always been when you say what has surprised me, that is that did what they would do afterwards, or that how they would keep the souvenirs and what they would do with them. And it was just with no consideration of what that meant to the family or what that meant. You know,
Yeah.
it did that was, I ain't used to that.
Another
I don't
thing.
know.
Sorry. What the BTK killer? What were your dealings or understanding with that particular case and that particular person?
Well, no, it was needing to know that. I
Yeah.
needed to know that. And when and doing other interviews, we would ask the same thing. What did you
Yeah.
do right after? That was a new question. A lot of times they weren't thinking about that.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were thinking about was there any evidence left or something to make their case. But this is a more human kind of psychological thing of what kind of behavior do they show, and then how fast would they do another crime? Because we were looking at cases and the escalation is clearly there. I think that's another major point that we found, is
Yeah.
that how fast the escalation. When was one victim not enough? I think the other thing is when there would be multiple victims at the same time. How
Yeah.
did that happen? I remember one case, two little girls, they're two 7-year-old girls, and they're both dead and posed.
Yeah.
How did one person do it? It turned out, and it took a long time. He did two more murders before um, able to finally, he would always rape first. And so finally, one rape victim survived, and
Yeah.
that's how they were able to get him.
Yeah. The nature is the nature of the crimes that you've seen in your time. One thing that I was always at pains, without understanding the depth of the psychology of it and the mindset of the people as you do, but I was always at pains when I'm doing briefings on murder investigations, and people would go, "But why would you do this if you've done that?" And I would say, you're trying to put a rational thought into an irrational action or an irrational mindset. Because I used to get frustrated where you talk about hypothesis and you're sitting around the briefing room and you're going, okay, maybe this happened. But I couldn't have, because he made a phone call 10 minutes later. And I'm thinking, you're giving a rational thought to a totally irrational act or crime.
Yep.
Do you subscribe to my thought process there?
Absolutely. You said it perfectly. You absolutely did. Is that how can we, in our logic, make sense out of it? You
Yeah,
can't.
yeah,
That's why we've got to get into what is driving that thought, what is driving it, because the thought is what drives the behavior. So we have to get into the thought,
yeah,
not the, we know what he did, right?
yeah,
We know what he did. We know the act, but we don't know the thought.
yeah. Interesting
And how do
getting
we get to that? Yeah.
interesting getting your take on it. The other thing that's come up, or two things, I'll just touch on these. A lot of the people that you've dealt with, and I've seen it in my own investigation career, that upbringing and the resentment to the mother, the bond between what turns out to be this killer and what's taken place with the mother, it seems to come up time and time again. Thoughts on that situation?
Well, the mother and the father, the whole issue of parenting, it was interesting in the study. Now, we did 36 serial killers, but what we found is that very often the family would disrupt around when the boy was around adolescent. And that's a very critical time, I
Yeah.
think, for not only boys, but certainly girls too. And so they would always complain about the mother, and they had always wanted to be with the father. Well, the problem was the father deserted them, right? He was the absent father. So then they only have the mother to blame. So I would often get
Uh,
annoyed early on. We would talk about the domineering mother. Well, she was the only parent. She
yeah,
had to be
okay.
both mother and father and discipline. And I said, they have
That
no
makes sense.
appreciation, so I think I wanted people to be a little careful about what they said about the bad mother, because I think it was unfair in some cases. Now, maybe not all cases, but certainly in some cases. And some mothers tried to do the right thing. They saw their son having this odd behavior, and they would take him to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist would say, "Oh, he'll grow out of it.
Yeah.
It's just an adolescent thing." Well, that's no help. And so what I try to do, this is the other area that I think we have to pay more attention to, is how to help people who get these cases, whether they're clinicians or social workers,
Mm.
whatever they are, is to pay attention to it and get some consultation. In other words, if you can't answer and you really think that this is odd, but you don't know what to say, there are plenty of people that would be happy to do a consult.
Yeah.
I do them all the time to help people, just to, is this bad behavior? Is this dangerous behavior? Or is this behavior that will resolve, by the next couple of years? Well, that's really important because people don't know how to handle the young adolescent. The emerging adult, I think, is the correct term we should use now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and you quite rightly identified that that's such a crucial stage in development, isn't it? Where life can go off in different directions at that adolescence stage.
And and hormones are changing. We cannot deny that testosterone is going, certainly for the young male,
Yeah,
and that pushes aggression, right? That's normal.
yeah.
So we
You
shouldn't be afraid of it. It's just that if it gets off on the wrong track, we better be careful.
point it back in
Look
the
at how
right.
many cases, well, you don't have, we have a lot of cases here in the States where the parents and the schools get concerned and they won't do anything. They've got to do something. They can't give their kids guns.
Yeah, I'm really glad because we're watching from this country and we're just horrified with the school shooting. So I think it's
Yes,
fantastic that you're looking into that aspect of it because it's got to stop. It's
yes,
horrendous, such a
right.
horrendous crime. The people that ingratiate themselves into investigations, that's another thing that I've seen. Whether it's a murder investigation or it could be something at a lower level, people that and I've always thought it's just a curiosity. They want to know what's in, or they're reflecting on their crime. Look at all the drama I've caused. Did you encounter that a lot during your studies and your work?
I'm trying to think of whether there certainly was a great deal of what we call narcissism, of kind of taking pride in these horrible
Yeah,
things that they were doing.
yeah,
So I do think that plays a role in it. I don't know how much that plays into their denial. How many times they'll say, "Oh, I don't know why I did what I did." Well, yeah, maybe you do know what you did, and you're just saying that. That's what we have to get at. But I do think that there is the narcissism that I can think of a number of cases where they did it because they felt they were entitled
yeah.
to be able to do it and get away with it. I think the boldness, I've had a couple of cases just in rape cases where the boldness has astounded me, that they felt they could just get away with it. They didn't.
What was that based on? The entitlement or just their
They
ego?
just did
What
it.
was driving? That's
We had a case where the it was a rape and he liked elderly women. He went into a hospital and he went on the eighth floor and he got a victim. And when the nurse came and said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm a nursing student." I mean,
mm,
he lied. And
yeah,
then he goes to the seventh floor. And this time he says that he's a family member. This is like 1 in the morning. So, it's very quiet. And he gets to the sixth floor before finally security comes. And what does he do with security? He says he tries to hit him. He
right.
assaults him.
Okay,
I
so
mean, That's boldness, isn't it? In a
Yeah.
hospital?
Oh, 100%. Well, you've touched on one of our state's most notorious serial killers, and a lot of people that I work with worked the case was the granny killer, and murdered 6 women, and all elderly ladies living in a certain area in Sydney, a fairly affluent area in Sydney. And they got onto him because he was a pie salesman, and he went to a nursing home and was sexually assaulted one of the elderly victims, and that sort of a lot more layers to it than that, but that
Sure.
led it to tracking him down. But he had issues with his mother, her promiscuity, I believe it was, and the ladies that he attacked, he would pull their underwear down and display them in vulnerable positions, and leave their bodies there. And that, I think that changed the way, because that would have it was 80s, I think, during the 80s, the way that we approached the criminal investigation taught us how to investigate serial killing, because it was happening so frequently, and it was just a
Yeah.
high profile situation. I want to ask you, I'm mindful of the time, but I just want to wrap up with the type of work that you've done, and look, not done, you're still doing, clearly, and full credit to you. It's been an absolutely amazing career. How do you keep your faith in humanity? Because sitting down chatting to you, you come across like, you can laugh, you can smile, you've look like you're enjoying life. And how have you managed to step away or not be destroyed by the evil darkness that you've seen during your career?
No, that's a very fair question, but I think that as a nurse, we're trained to separate ourselves from terrible situations.
Yeah,
We see all kinds of disease and sadness and so forth. So you have to be able to separate out and not let it. That said, it doesn't mean that you don't think about the cases. Certainly
mm,
I do. And some of them really, child cases really are hard to
yeah,
take. And but I think that that's where you have to be trained. You have to be able to separate. Well, you yourself you can't go taking your cases home at night, or you'd be not sleeping much.
yeah,
So I think that that's something you have to learn and you have to be trained for. And that's what I do. The other thing is I do teaching. I try to translate what I'm doing for younger generations to be able to carry on and to understand, so we can stamp out some of this. That's where I get most of my, um, that's where I think that I like to think that I'm doing something really good.
yeah. I get that. It's nourishing for you, because it is a dark world, but you can work in it and come out relatively unscathed. I've found that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I read somewhere that you had some of the notorious serial killers sending you Christmas cards.
Easter cards too.
Oh, oh, oh well,
Easter.
I'm glad they didn't forget Easter. Bizarre
No,
world
that's
you live
pretty
in.
good.
How
I
did how
know.
did, how did you feel about that?
Well, I'd like to think that they appreciated something out of Mindhunter,
Yeah.
something like that. But I thought it was pretty funny.
It is funny, and I've had situations like that, and you just got to laugh about it. One,
And I knew where they were. They were safely locked up, so I wasn't worried.
okay, that makes you a bit tougher and a bit braver if you know they're locked up. But the things that you've accomplished in your career, and winding it back, I'm focusing on the homicide, the stuff that you've done in nursing, and the role model that you've been for women in law enforcement and nursing. Full credit to you, and I mean that with the utmost
Thank
honesty and respect. And I think it's really funny that you guys wouldn't even appreciate how much respect you got over here with what I call the true homicide detectives that understand the subtleties of the work that you're doing. So full credit to you, and getting you on I Catch Killers. I can't explain how excited I was getting you on. So
Good. Well, I've certainly enjoyed it. You're wonderful to talk with. I enjoy it very much.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, one question, because the listeners
Sure.
will criticise me if I don't ask. The character that based loosely on you in Mindhunters, Dr. Wendy Carr. Do you like
Dr.
the
Wendy.
Do you like the portrayal? She seems like a pretty cool lady to me, and what I've seen on the show.
I loved her as an actress. I thought she did a great job, and she
Yeah.
did the cases well. What I didn't like about her background and the other two is they got it so wrong
Yeah.
that and they did not consult with John about all that kind of stuff. They had
Right.
all of our material, but and I know it was just for Hollywood that they wanted to get a wider audience. But dogs are my favorite, not cats.
Sorry. Well,
Remember, she would feed the cat. Remember,
oh
she
yeah,
had
yeah.
food out for the cat.
Well, as you said, it's for Hollywood, but look, the way it's portrayed, and I've got to say on the show, I like the way they approach interviews. I like the edginess of taking, like, the person sitting there expecting they're going to get a standard question, and then they go off on a tangent. I love that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But
I thought
look,
it was very good, very well
yeah.
done. Yeah, good.
Well, look, all the best for the future. Thank you so much for your time, and our listeners are going to absolutely love this chat and the stuff that you talk about. Such an interesting area.
Thank you for all your kind words. I appreciate it.